I want to quickly review the process of how development occurs according to Jean Piaget. You've been reading on his theory, and I'm not going to talk about the stages here. I just want to talk about the two processes of assimilation and accommodation, and the two states of equilibrium and disequilibrium, and how they all go together to explain how in fact development occurs. So according to Jean Piaget, there's two processes that occur. One is assimilation, one is accommodation. You use assimilation when you have schemas or mental structures to understand the world that you're trying to understand. So for instance, when I was a young child, lived on the ocean, and I knew the word ocean. And then my mother took me into the mountains, and I saw a river, which of course I called it an ocean. And she said, no, it's a river. And since all I'm doing is assimilating and putting information into my schemas of water, when I get back to the ocean, I now call it a river, because I had not processed that there could be two different types of body of water. I just changed the name. So in order for me to understand the concept that there could be two different types of body of water, and water wasn't the salient feature, I had to accommodate my mental structures or schemas and change them to understand there's an ocean, a big body of water with waves, and then there's a river, a fast-flowing, thinner body of water. So assimilation and accommodation are two processes that are very important according to Piaget for you to develop cognitively. Now, equilibrium and disequilibrium are two states that you're in that are very important for cognitive development. So you're in equilibrium when you have the cognitive structures to understand the world that you're trying to understand. For instance, if you have the cognitive structures to understand this discussion, you will be in equilibrium and it will make sense to you. You're in disequilibrium, like I was about ocean versus river, when the information coming in does not agree with the way you see the world. So here's another example. When my father was a little boy, he and actually someone who became the treasurer of the state of California, which may explain a lot, my father convinced Bert, his friend, to give him a dime for my dad's nickel. The basis Bert based on was the nickel was bigger than the dime, therefore it should be worth more. But then they go down to the candy store, and when my dad was little, you could get a piece of candy for a penny. And my dad got 10 pieces of candy and Bert got 5. That put Bert in disequilibrium. How could that happen? How could his bigger coin be worth less than my dad's smaller coin? So then Bert has to change his cognitive structures, his schemas, to understand that size is not necessarily a salient variable for more. That is disequilibrium. So when you think of cognitive development according to Piaget, if you're in equilibrium, you assimilate the information and it makes sense. If you are in trying to understand information that doesn't make sense, then you're in disequilibrium, which forces you to cognitively accommodate your schemas, not the world, your schemas to understanding the world, and that accommodation is what creates cognitive growth. So in fact, what we want to do with children and families and everybody, including ourselves, is to enter in cognitive conflict. Disequilibrium is cognitive conflict because that will cause us to reorganize our schemas and to develop cognitively. So the other concept that Piaget talks about is you develop cognitively because you live to know. You're motivated just to understand the world better. You're motivated to be better adapted to the world. It's just basically a biological motivation. So quickly, the final thing, a couple of things I want to say. Piaget, as you should know by now, has 4 stages: sensory, motor, pre-operational, concrete, formal. And I'm going to say a little more about them in another little presentation. And these are stages, and stages are like staircases. Each stage is qualitatively different than the previous stage, and each stage is a hierarchical. That is, pre-operational stage builds on the information you get in the sensory motor stage. Concrete builds on what is in pre-operation and therefore what was in sensory motor. And the way we think now depends greatly on the fact that we had sensory motor thinking when we were an infant. So it's hierarchical, that it builds on it, and each of these stages is qualitatively different. They're actually defined in very different ways. So that's kind of the overview. That's the overview I wanted to give, and make sure all those constructs you read about in my webpage made sense, and I hope this helps you understand that.